Tell me, what kind of things do you think would help to have an encounter with God? So you want an experience or an encounter with God. What kind of things help that? This is actually a question. Serving him. What else? What else helps to have an encounter with God? Praying. Yeah. Praising. Desire. Yeah. Having a desire for it. Spend time listening. Yeah. Sorry, say again. Thank you. Be thankful for what you've got. Yeah. What else? Anything? Reading the Bible, thank you. Yes? Waiting. Cool. What about doubt? What about doubting? Is that on your list? It is on mine now. Hopefully it's on yours at the end. I want to speak about a guy called Thomas. He's normally called Doubting Thomas. I don't like that. I would class it better as Thomas in pursuit of personal faith. But before we get to the story that makes him famous, or infamous rather, he appears twice beforehand in the New Testament. Only in the Gospel of John, other than in sort of the lists where the Gospel writers write down the lists of who was apostle and who wasn't. And both of those passages characterize Thomas really well and set him up for a great encounter with Jesus. The first one is in John 11. This is the part where Lazarus died, and Lazarus was a good friend of Jesus and the disciples, and remember Mary and Martha and all that family, and Lazarus died, and that was terrible news, like a good friend died. And this is what Thomas says. Jesus says, and so then he told them plainly, look, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I'm glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. And then it says, then Thomas, called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Which is sort of his pessimistic attitude, slant. We're going to somebody's funeral, tell you what, let's all go and die. It's slightly beyond the glass is half empty type pessimism. But really, when you think of it, when you read a bit closer, his statement actually shows great devotion and dedication. In verse 7 of the same passage, Jesus says, then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you are going to go back there? Really what was expected when they go back to Judea, that Jesus would be captured and stoned or crucified, and the rest of the disciples as well for belonging to him. So actually his statement of let's also go and most likely die shows great devotion and dedication and commitment. In other words, he's so devoted that he can say, let's go even if we die. You know, when the other disciples deserted Jesus later on and they left and went fishing and all that, Thomas was still around. Even when Jesus had appeared to the disciples after he had risen, and Thomas had missed out, we'll get to that later. He wasn't there when Jesus appeared to them. For whatever reason, we don't know. He still stayed around a whole week before Jesus appeared again. And remember, there was no guarantee that Jesus was ever going to appear to them again, but he still stuck around. He's committed. He might not have been the most prominent of the apostles. He always appears sort of in the second part of the list, never says too much. But he was certainly consistent and devoted. His devotion to Jesus and dedication to God's kingdom enabled him to, or set him up for a great encounter with Jesus. The second thing that makes him stand out for me is his honesty. And we can read that a little later on in John 14. This is what Jesus says to his disciples there. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you. I'm going there to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, so that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I'm going. See, we know what Jesus is talking about, or at least what he's referring to. He's referring to the cross and the resurrection, the fact that he's going to come back and then eventually take us home, and there's going to be places prepared for us there. I remember, just on a side note, Keith Green, you remember the Christian musician? Full beard and all that. He's reported saying at one concert, I read that God made the heaven and earth in 6 days. Just 6 days. And whether it's literal 6 days or not, I don't care. He said, but 6 days. And look how beautiful it is. And then I read that Jesus has gone to prepare a place for me. Now, he's been doing that for 2,000 years. Now, if this world took 6 days and is so beautiful, and can you imagine what heaven will be like when Jesus is spending 2,000 years by now on it, preparing the place for us? Side note. But, so we know what he's talking about. They didn't know, but rather than just nod in agreement, Thomas asked the obvious question. Thomas said to him, Lord, we don't know where you're going, so how can we know the way? Actually, Jesus, I don't know. I haven't got a clue. Can you please explain it again? We're in chapter 14 by now, remember? So, we often feel stupid for asking those kind of questions, especially when it comes to questions about faith. It's bad enough saying to someone who you've known for weeks, sorry, can you just remind me of your name again? It will feel stupid. But especially when it comes to questions about faith, I just so encourage you never, ever to swallow religious jargon and run-off-the-mill answers, pious, common answers that are as commonplace as they are meaningless. Become a religious whistleblower. You know what a whistleblower is? With no authority or anything, he blows the whistle and he calls stop to whatever malpractice or that's going on. Nearly. Don't accept things. Even if everyone else is oblivious to it, or if everyone else seems to nod in agreement or seems to understand it, call stops to it. Don't just rattle off a creed when you're not sure about what you're saying. I remember it got us into deep trouble, that attitude in me, in Austria. In the church where we worked, it was a very traditional church, and they had a traditional liturgy, very beautiful. The first time I heard it, I thought, wow, this is amazing. The depth of the words and the sayings and the sentences, there's so much richness there and so on. But then over time I realized that people were just saying it week after week and just saying it. And there was one particular thing that I wasn't quite so sure about. And it was the vicar stands at the front and says, God be with you. And the congregation answers back, and with your spirit. And I thought, hang on a minute, why does he say God be with you, but then they talk to him, and with your spirit? Is there some spirit in the vicar that isn't in the congregation? Anyway, so I asked some of the members of the congregation that have been saying that for 30 years. And most of them didn't have a clue. Oh, I'm not sure. Yeah, but you say it every week. What is it? And I wasn't even so much interested in a theological explanation about what it actually meant. I was more interested in what it meant to them, because they said it every week, but they didn't know. They couldn't answer the question. So be the one who asks the stupid questions. I noticed that when I ask stupid questions, everyone else is glad that somebody's asked, and they actually get an answer. And the same is true in our relationship with God. We gotta pursue faith, pursue reason for faith. And Thomas's questioning leads to a deeper encounter with Jesus. Because he asked a stupid question when everybody else wasn't prepared to, Jesus opened something up for him. This is what Jesus answers. Jesus answered, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Wow. Just imagine he hadn't asked. It would have been just some gobbledygook about going and preparing some rooms, and you don't know, but I'm going there, and you know where I'm going, and all that. But then Thomas said, no, can you explain about the way, about this religious pathway, about this sort of lifestyle that I need to follow? And Jesus said, no, hang on. I am the way, and I am the truth, not something out there, and I am the life. What a deep encounter that is compared to just a bit of talk. So his deep devotion and his honesty about how he feels and what he thinks and knows lead him to become the famous doubting Thomas. And you can read that story in John 20:24 onwards. Now Thomas, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, we've seen the Lord. But he said to them, unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Then he said to Thomas, put your finger here, see my hands, reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. Thomas said to him, my Lord and my God. Then Jesus told him, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. Remember, this is not a doubting Thomas. This is a Thomas in pursuit of personal faith. His pessimistic slant doesn't just allow him to believe something that sounds too good to be true without actually experiencing it himself. His honesty towards his convictions and own experience means he can't just accept someone else's word for it. We've seen the Lord. Okay, unless I can poke my finger into the side where the spear went, I'm not going to believe it. A German Catholic theologian called Georg Hermes says this: positive doubt. That's what he calls this, what Thomas has. He has positive doubt. Not doubt to pull down, but doubt to sort of aid his inquiry. One can believe only what one has perceived to be true from reasonable grounds. And consequently, one must have the courage to continue doubting until one has found reliable grounds to satisfy reason. In other words, in order to believe, you've got to understand some things. And therefore, unless you understand it, you have to continue doubting, continue questioning, continue asking questions, so that eventually you will dig down to those reliable grounds that then will carry faith. Without that, you don't have reasonable grounds to base your faith on. So he doubted in order to be sure. He didn't doubt so he could, but he doubted in order to be sure. He can't just take someone else's word for it. You know, if I don't know, if I said to you,